I'm good. Just had to vent.
Growing Kids God's Way, Chapter 11. Discipline with Correction. Okay. B3 title. Correction. In the early years, you are putting what into your child?
These three, I didn't get them. No, either. I kept rewinding it.
What'd you have?
Values, but the next two.
Values. You are exchanging.
What, did you have the answer, Owen?
I don't have them.
And
I loaned out my teacher's manual to another church, and they haven't brought it back yet.
Well, we all missed it. So at a certain point, we get to get graded on the curve, right?
Yes. Yeah.
We backed up the video, backed it up.
And I missed last week, and I ended up doing the wrong chapter this week, so I don't have any answers for this one.
So you're exchanging childishness for foolishness?
That's what I was thinking.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
A child by nature is self-oriented. Biblical ethics are others-oriented. The tension between the two produces
Maybe maliciousness? No.
disobedience. Okay, we're going to read the chapter, friends. All right. So we're on page 145. There are days when our children make us proud. They follow through on your expectations, saying thank you just the right time, comfort a sibling in need, shake hands with new neighbor while saying very nice to meet you. There are also days when our children willfully fall short. They make mistakes, misbehave, and choose wrong over right. As for meeting the new neighbor, all you hear is a grunt instead of hello, and you feel your face flushing red. While it is easy to encourage the good moments, how do you correct the unpleasant ones? In this and following chapters, we'll take up the challenges associated with the correction side of training. Anxious parents have frequently asked why we present a subject of such great importance at the end and not the beginning of the series. It is placed here because correction is not part of the moral, emotional, or intellectual building process, but rather part of behavioral management and maintenance. It is what parents do to keep their children on track and moving forward. Correction is the constant process of restoring children back to a level of expectation and a way of life that benefits them and those with whom they interact. I'm going to read this again because this is a key sentence. Correction is what parents do to keep their children on track moving forward. Correction is a constant process of restoring children back to a level of expectation and a way of life that benefits them and those with whom they contact. Any conversation relating to discipline and correction cannot take place without first encouraging the relational, moral, emotional, and intellectual components of training. These foundational components are deficient. If these foundational components are deficient, then parental correction can easily become a type of tyranny rather than an expression of love and education. That's very key right there. What components? If what components are missing?
Relational, moral, emotional, and intellectual components of training.
Yes. So this much of the book has been about training the relational, moral, emotional, and intellectual components. All right. If we don't train to those components, then our correction can easily become a type of tyranny. So we discussed this last week as far of corporal punishment. And we talked about how we would apply physical correction only to adjust the heart, not to address behavior, and that the point of it is for the child to run to us rather than away from us. And so that is the love aspect of correction. And if we don't understand that, then we're very likely to be tyrants and just demanding that our children act according to our will without a consideration for the rest of the aspects of training that are necessary so that children won't be exasperated by us. The Bible says, fathers, do not exasperate your children, and that applies for mothers as well. So, correction is a way of rescuing children from decisions made out of their immaturity or lack of wisdom, and sometimes from these moments when they choose wrong over right and disobedience over obedience. However, the corrective side of training is not all about fixing undesirable or wayward behavior, because parents must also pay attention to the preventative components of training that reduce the amount of correction needed in the first place, and the developmental components that are continually changing. Training in the early years requires a basic understanding of what is going on in the developing mind of your child. Life expands very rapidly for young children and becomes more complex for older ones. Conflict is a normal part of learning, but there are greater and lesser periods of conflict. However, parents will always have a choice. They can train proactively to prevent poor or undesirable behavior, placing a greater emphasis on building into a child's character habits of the heart that are good and nutritive and that promote healthy growth. The other is a reactive approach that takes notice of unwanted behaviors after they are already sprouted. In the latter case, a greater emphasis is placed on removing rather than preventing unwanted behavior. Okay, can somebody reiterate what I just read to me in your own words? What's the difference between preventative and reactive training?
Well, preventative would be beforehand, and like when you see, you want to prevent it from happening beforehand, while reaction is a reaction to something happening.
Okay. And so how would it look? Think of an example.
Judson pushed Bennett over, so I reacted to that behavior and I grabbed Judson, and versus I see him start twitching and I know he's about to push Bennett over, so I pull him to the side and be like, why are you frustrated?
Okay, great. That's a great example.
Well done.
Yep. So what is the primary difference from a parental point of view? Okay, let me ask it another way. How does a parent act preemptively rather than reactively to our children?
I react a lot calmer.
Yes.
But I guess you would need to get to know your children so that you can kind of see these things coming before they happen.
Good call. That's what I'm looking for, is if we are a student of our children, then we can more accurately predict what they're about to do or what they might do. And that requires paying attention. requires paying attention. So I have noticed that it's real easy for children to become static noise in the room. They're just doing their thing and we're doing our thing, and what they're doing is not really registering on our brains other than just static noise until something happens. One of them screams, one of them cries, or something crashes, right?
Yeah.
Or it goes silent, right? That's when you really go, oh, what's going on? So then, as parents, we react, and rightly so. You got to, when that silence has got to mean something. And then we're in the corrective mode. So I'm challenging us to pay closer attention. And if you think that it's interesting when your kids are that size, just wait till they're adults and try then to act preemptively to help them avoid pitfalls. And if you don't have a relationship with them that they trust, you won't be able to help them when you know you see it, you see what's going on, but if you don't have a relationship with them, you won't be able to help them as adults. But I got to tell you something. When you do have a relationship with them, it's still difficult. But there's something really precious about it when they say, okay, I understand what you're saying. I might not like to hear it, but I understand what you're saying. And especially when they come back later and say, thanks for caring enough to talk to me about that. Well, that's really powerful stuff. But it starts, if you want them to be that way when they're 20, it starts when carries on when they're 12, right? So I'm wanting to encourage you that these things they build in the life of our children. And there are no perfect parents. There aren't any perfect kids, because we're all people, we all have our flaws. But when, with the help of God, we develop a relationship with our children so that they are obedient, they understand the moral reason why, and they react in love towards us and towards one another, towards others, it's an amazing thing. It is. So, and it is possible. It is possible. All right. So, here's the word we were looking for, B3, correction. Let's face it, life is full of temptations, and that's why young lives require training. Part of the training comes from encouraging right behavior, and part comes from correcting wrong and inappropriate behavior. To bring back from error, or to align an unacceptable deviation back to the standard. While parental encouragement keeps children on track and moving forward, the objective of correction is to get them back on track. It is natural for parents to react spontaneously to negative behavior. They see defiance and jump on it. However, before responding, parents should first stop and think about what just happened, and then filter what they saw or heard through two governing precepts related to correction. The first one is, the type of correction depends on the presence or absence of malicious intent. Okay? The type of correction depends on the presence or absence of malicious intent. Where do you draw the line between mistakes associated with innocent play and purposeful mischief? When does curiosity cross the line to snooping? At what point does a misdemeanor become a felony? In life and certainly in parenting, there are two realms of wrong. The first realm is called childishness and represents the unintentional and non-malicious mistakes made in life. With children, it is often the result of a lack of knowledge or lack of understanding or a lack of coordination. Your son or daughter may do something wrong, but he or she does not know it is wrong. There is no intent to do wrong. In the second realm, a child knowingly and intentionally chooses to act in defiance without regard to the consequence or injury to self or others. The child knows that he is doing wrong and continues anyway. This is referred to in Scripture as foolishness. A heart condition we'll expand on later in this presentation. One of the more common mistakes parents make in the correction process is failing to recognize the difference between childishness and foolishness, thereby treating all wrong the same way. That is neither fair to the child nor a wise way to parent. While wrongful acts of childishness and foolishness need correction, what separates the two realms is motive and intent. There is a difference between the mistakes of childhood and the purposeful disobedience. Spilling a glass of water is childishness. Intentionally spilling a glass of water is a foolish wrong. When assessing behaviors in need of correction, parents should ask themselves, was my child's wrongful action born out of childishness or foolishness? How that question is answered will determine what happens next. Both childishness and foolishness require correction, but not the same type of correction. So, I would characterize foolishness as being a symptom of the heart, and the heart is wrong. So, then we're going to try to correct the heart. Whereas childishness is bad behavior, but the heart is not at fault. And so then we just correct the bad behavior, and it's going to look differently. That's why I said we don't spank a child for bad behavior. We spank a child for having the wrong heart. Of course, that heart is symptomized or demonstrated by behavior, but it's not the behavior that we're necessarily after as much as the heart in that corrective action. So preemptive parenting would be, we know that in childishness, if this child reaches for something past their drink, there's a good chance they'll knock it over because they're not paying attention and they're clumsy because they're not coordinated because they're children, right? So preemptive parenting says, I need to move that glass out of their way. That may mean that when they want to drink water, they'll have to ask me to move it back, and I can move it back for them. That takes work. It takes work. But the work is well worth it, because by paying attention that little bit, all right, I'll reach out and move that glass out of their way, I just avoided having to make the distinction of, he knocked it over, was that childishness or was it foolishness? Now, you say, well, I could just warn the child. Say, be careful, don't knock that drink over. Yes, you could. And then if they go ahead and knock it over, it's more likely that it was foolishness. But it could still be childishness if they didn't intend to and it was clumsy on their part. You know, now you got to make this decision, and it puts the whole atmosphere at the table in tension. Yeah, on pins and needles, right? Yep. And it could have been avoided if we just went, move that glass so that don't happen. Right? And 100 other times, or maybe 1,000 other times per day, that if we are in focus, we can avoid the need for correction if we're in focus. You say, really? Forever? It gets better. As you know, as a child grows in coordination and as they grow in training, that doesn't mean there won't be those days when today is a good day to die. They happen, but they have then that's where there's a heart issue that has to be corrected. Okay, so are you getting, is this sinking down, clear down into the middle of you, where it's like, this I see. It's not all the same. Just because he does something wrong, it's not all the same. There's different motive and reason, which means there's different reaction, and correction can one way or the other. And that there's a lot of things that we can do that are preventative. It's like, don't stand up in your high chair. Sit down. The reason I want them to sit down, why? Well, because if they stand up, there's a good chance they'll fall out of their high chair, or there's a good chance that they're going to knock something off their tray. So, as the training progresses, I can say, don't stand up in your high chair. They haven't even stood up yet, but I saw them start to. Right? Don't stand up in your high chair. Okay, Daddy. Then they don't. Or I could change that to a more positive approach. Say, hey, please remain seated in your high chair. I don't want you to fall. Please remain seated. Okay, Daddy. Good. And then there's those days when they're like, nope, I'm going to stand up whether you said not to or not, you know. And then that's when we say, okay, preventative correction didn't help, or preventative action didn't help, and now they're acting in foolishness towards the instruction. What's next? An opportunity for them to understand that their heart is wrong. Now, as training continues and your child matures and understands, a lot of times just the opportunity for them is in the wrong place will result in their own changing of their attitude and heart. That's what we want, because that is what makes it easier to get along in life and easier to get along with God, is when we've trained to know how to do that for ourselves. But there are those days when they are not going to change their own attitude, and then we have a responsibility before God to adjust their heart. So that's that. I'm describing to you the process. The Bible says, lay hands on no man suddenly. And I think that includes children. Lay hands on no child suddenly. But that doesn't say don't ever lay hands on them. And it's also a matter of being like, what we're saying is, think about it, and ask yourself, what's the cause? What's the root? Now, it doesn't take a long time to think it through, especially once we've trained ourselves. This training is actually more about parental training, right? Because we have to learn to take on these habits. And then once we've trained ourselves, training the child is really not that difficult. Not to beat a dead horse, so to speak, but let's go back to the idea of dog training. If you don't know what you want your dog to do, he's never going to do it. But it's a big difference. So, I don't know, you guys did a lot of work with horses. Did you ever study the Ray Hunt method?
Not that I recall.
Training method. Anyway, in short, there's a training method that's popular, and the basis of it is make it easy to do what's right and difficult to do what's wrong.
That's there's a variation of that you use to teach a horse to get in a trailer.
Yes. So
some of the worst wrecks I ever had were getting horses in trailers.
my dad was a cowboy through and through. Like he didn't think straight. He thought like a cowboy. But we've loaded horses into all kinds of vehicles. He never had a horse trailer when I was growing up. We hauled him in the back of his pickup with sideboards. But once he did get a stock trailer, there were all these methods about trailering horses, right? And park your trailer in the trailer so that they're used to going in and out. You know what? I've seen horses that are used to going in and out to get hay out of the trailer. When you get ready to load them and you got them haltered up, they still go, no, I ain't getting in there.
Yeah.
So there was my dad's method of making it easy to do what's right and hard to do what's wrong. He would tie a rope in the trailer, bring it around, so the lead is already tied in the front of the trailer. He'd bring a rope around their backside and around the dolly inside the trailer so that you could pull up, and this would pull the back legs like this. And then he would say, and a lot of times that's all it took, and they'd get right in. But if they didn't, he would say, here, hold this rope, son. And then he would warm them up. He would warm them up with whatever he had handy. And you know what? They would get in the trailer. And here's what's really interesting. Once or twice is all it took. And after that, none of his horses were hard to load. My dad's horses, you just walk up and in fact, a lot of times you better get out of their way because they're getting in the trailer, right? In fact, most of the time with my dad's horses, he would lead them up to the trailer and just toss the lead rope over their back as they went in.
Yep.
Because they knew where to go. So, make it easy to do what's right, difficult to do what's wrong. Now, I'm not necessarily approving of all my dad's. Some of them were probably more harsh than they needed to be. But his horses sure acted nice. And, that was, it was kind of neat.
Along with that, the horses knew what to expect.
Yeah.
And what he wanted from them.
Yeah.
They weren't confused about it.
That's right. Now, I will say this about Dad's horses. They loaded easy, but they were all a little bit head shy. If you're...
Why?
Yeah. If you're riding along on one of Dad's horses and they'd probably duck a little bit. They also neck reined really extremely well. And I know that there are better methods than Grandpa Otis had, but for training neck reining, he had this leather bat, and when he would touch the reins to the side of their neck, then he'd hit them in the side of the head with this leather bat that he had.
Like a blackjack.
Well, no, it was just two straps of leather that had a piece of leather in the middle so that they would clap.
Yep.
And he'd do that.
More shock than awe.
Right. Not an injury, but a slap real loud. And then he would work them into the corner of the corral so that they had to really turn hard, I'm going to tell you something. If you're riding one of Dad's horses and you was going to touch it on the side with the rein, you better be ready to hold on because that horse is going to turn now, And, I mean, it was like power steering. And so that, after he trained him, he didn't carry the bat every day. The training was accomplished. And then the horses, and you know what? I actually think horses enjoy, once they're trained, I think they enjoy working. I know that dogs do.
Well, I'm sure you have to be a little tough with a horse. I mean, they're pretty big.
Yeah.
They're pretty stubborn
like,
too.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Well, what you're really doing is you're laying down communication tools, you know what I mean? Because they can't just speak, whether it's a dog or a horse or a 2-year-old, they can't speak their mind, so when you lay out these communication tools...
And you're showing them the boundaries.
Yeah.
Well said.
So I'll tell you one last training story. I had this dog, her name was, I can't now, Nikki. We had her for 12 or 13 years. So she was the family dog for all my kids growing up, Nikki. Good old Nikki. And when she got old, she got arthritis and she could barely get up, you know, and she just lay around the yard. She wasn't in pain when she's laying there, but if she had to get up, boy, oh, you could tell it wasn't comfortable. I'd walk outside with a pellet gun, and she would see that, and oh, her tail would start thump, 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 thump. Oh, she'd struggle to her feet. She couldn't wait for me to shoot a starling out of the tree, and then she'd go over there and pick it up and tail wag it and bring it back to me. Why? She loved that. She loved that work, and it was because, well, I figured up after when she died, I figured up the years of how many ducks I had shot each year, and she'd brought to me over 1,000 ducks.
Wow.
And so, you know, that's what she just loved to do. So even though when she was old and it was painful to get up, boy, she would tail would thump, 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 and she just loved to do it. And I think how wonderful it is if our training to do what's right is such that we delight in virtue, that we love to do it. We love to do what's right. It's just so it excites us to do the right thing. And on the days, I have days when it's like that, and it's so pleasant. Then on those days when you don't, it's like it's not fun to be out of sync with God or with man. You know, I've had a few altercations where I had to deal with, you know, those that were in charge of the rules, and I don't enjoy that, because I think, why didn't I just do what was right? You know, if I'd have been doing what was right, then it would have been a much more pleasant exchange. So, you know, don't do the crime if you can't do the time.
Yeah, and I have figured that out.
And let's do one disclaimer. Pastor Owen is not saying use a leather bat on your child.
Yeah. For all of you out there live, yeah, that's true. I'm not saying
that was a metaphor.
No, don't use a leather. No, we recommend a paint stick, actually. Nothing.
That would make a little extra noise, though. A little more show.
Yeah, nothing that would cause injury. We don't. There's never a time that a child should be injured, ever. So we don't recommend. We recommend nothing that has any abusiveness to it. But we do recommend changing a child's heart, and if necessary, that can require physical application of the Board of Education to the seat of knowledge. All right. So here we go then, onward with the last little bit of this chapter. So parents should not correct all foolishness the same way or with the same strength of consequences. Parents should consider the following 4 factors when rendering a judicial system about a child's foolish action: the frequency of the offense, the age of the child, the context of the moment, the overall characterization of behavior. Is this child like this all the time? No, generally they're not. Well, then what's going on? Maybe they didn't sleep well that night. Maybe they're constipated. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe there's some other situation. They've been having a stressful day at school. Does that mean that they don't receive any correction? That was like, well, my little Johnny, he's had a hard time. No, it doesn't. We still correct them for misbehavior, but the correction can be different. It doesn't have to be the same all of the time. I was talking to a parent last Sunday after church, and they said they went to correct their child and sat down with them and told them what, you know, they were planning to spank them, and told them why they was going to get a spanking and what they had done wrong, and you know, as they were explaining this, the child just melted and cried and hugged them and was genuinely sorry. And so the dad said, I told him, you know what, this time you're not going to get a spanking. He said, I just couldn't bear to spank him. I said, well, you did the right thing, because your objective was met. The child was repentant. The child was sorry. And the child didn't resist you any longer. He ran to you, not away from you. And so in that case, yeah, mission accomplished, right?
What if he tries to do that every time though?
Well, you know the difference between when your
Right,
child
yeah.
is really,
Yeah.
truly repentant and when they're just blowing smoke up your skirt.
Right.
And if he sincerely changes his heart without a
Right.
spanking every time,
Yeah.
that would be ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's real. And we're not, I mean, you know, we might have been born last night. What's that saying? I was born in the night, but not last night. Didn't fall off the potato truck yesterday. This ain't my first rodeo. Yeah. All right. Exactly. Okay. So, once parents identify the foolish or rebellious behavior and consider these 4 factors, they should then determine the appropriate level of consequence. When considering the consequence, parents should also consider the first rule of correction. Punishment must fit the crime. Too harsh of punishment exasperates the child. Too lenient a punishment fails to put corrective value on the offense. Since we know offenses range in infrequent and minor infractions to open defiance, correction should reflect the degree of the offense. Generally speaking, child's foolishness falls into one of 3 levels. Minor infractions that call for verbal correction, infractions that need some action which call for more than a verbal reprimand, and offenses that require the full weight of parental law. There you go, that's right. So, these 3 levels are not necessarily sequential. That is, they do not necessarily follow in order. In fact, in the early years, level 3 is used more than levels 1 or 2. Parents should reserve levels 1 and 2, the warnings and the mild reprimands, for borderline cases that are less common. In other words, they don't want to say the word spanking in here. But what we're talking about is that when your child is little, they require more level 3, more spankings, because they have to be adjusted in that way. But the spankings are not, don't be too severe in your spankings. You're only looking for a corrective level. You're not looking for that come to Jesus moment. When the child is little, they don't know, they can't comprehend that. So sometimes when you told them don't touch that, or what, then that's enough. I said don't touch it. Why? Well, because it's the stove and it's hot, So better a slap on the hand than a burn on the fingers, right? But how many times would it be easier if we had the energy to do it, just to move them further away? Don't tip over the salt shaker. It'd be easier just to move the salt, right? You see what I'm saying? Now, we're not talking about the rebellious behavior in a child. We're talking about their childishness, right? Okay.
We were eating the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I had my glass, and he's like, "Let's just leave it right here," just before we left. And I was like, "Let's not." I moved it because I'm like, he's
right. Because you could avoid.
Right. Yeah. I'm like, it's gonna end up getting knocked over, I'm sure.
Okay, so here we're going to have a description of these 3 levels. Verbal admonishment. The first level of offense calls for a warning. The warning does not reduce the significance of need for first-time obedience. You would not punish a child for a single infraction if he is normally characterized by immediate compliance. Although his infraction may be rebellious according to the letter of the law, it does not require the full weight of judgment, but the fair weight of justice. You should consider his actions a first level of offense given his normal behavior. Admonishment is the proper consequence in this context. So what are we talking about? We're talking about that ordinarily the child is characterized by first-time obedience, and you say, okay, it's time to go brush your teeth and get ready for bed. And now this time, they just keep playing and they ignored what you said. Then a verbal admonishment is, hey, what did I just say? Brush my teeth. That's right. What's the right response? Yes, Dad. Away they go. That's what we're talking about, a verbal admonishment. That's not repeating, I said go brush your teeth. Go brush your teeth. That's different, okay? But a verbal admonishment is when you stop and you say, did you hear me? Do you understand what I told you to do? What's the right answer? All right then.
Yes, Uncle Owen.
Yeah. Okay. Verbal admonishment with action. Level 2 offenses include new but unacceptable behaviors that are becoming more common, old habits that are re-emerging, or yesterday's warnings that have not been heeded. The consequence can be a swat on the hand or the bottom and a general rebuke. I said, stop that. Parents can also use a reflective timeout or reflective sit time. The goal of reflective sit time is to help the child become prudent, to foresee evil and avoid punishment by doing what's right. Proverbs 22:3 says, a prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Here is an example of level 2 offense and how a timeout can help. So Becky, Ryan, and Nathan are playing kickball in the backyard. Their mom approached them and gave the children a warning to be cautious, not kick the ball into a newly planted garden. While observing from the window, she noticed that Becky's lack of caution caused the ball to go in the edge of the garden before being stopped. Before Becky got herself into serious trouble, Mrs. Jones assigned her to a patio chair for 5 minutes, not as a punishment, but to help her settle down and gain self-control. So this is essentially the same as moving the salt shaker out of the kid's reach. You see the kid is headed for disaster, and you say, hey, you need to just sit down and think about it. And this isn't that you're trying to punish them, but in this situation, you couldn't remove the salt shaker, so you removed the kid. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So Becky's careless kicking the ball was foolishness because she did not take her mother's warning seriously. And although the ball never actually made it into the garden, it was clear that caution was not part of Becky's play. The instruction given by Mom dealt as much with the caution as they dealt with keeping the ball out of the garden. The offense called for more than a warning, but less than a level 3 consequence. Becky's mom used a timeout as she assigned Becky to the patio chair. She was instructed to sit, not as punishment, but as time to gain self-control. All right. When used in this manner, reflective sit times become the last stop before crossing the bridge to trouble. The idea is to get the child to ask herself, do I really want to go in this direction? Okay. In essence, we're talking about giving the child opportunity to change their own heart. Okay. All right. Any questions about that? Then we'll move to the level 3 consequence. This level of offense refers to routine acts and attitudes of rebellion, both active and passive, and to moral violations against others, including siblings, peers, parents, and others in authority. The following scenarios will bring clarity to some of these points. After workers hung new French doors in my office, my 2-year-old granddaughter found it amusing to open the door, walk through, shut the door, and then repeat the action from the other side. Her father instructed her to stop playing with Grandpa's new doors. Her compliance lasted 15 minutes before she tested her father's instruction. Her rebellion was active and direct, requiring level 3 correction. She did not require any additional warnings since her father had just instructed her. In contrast, let's assume Ashley had complied with her father's instructions. For that, her father would have offered her encouragement and praise. Shortly thereafter, Ashley cut her finger off in the French doors. 3 weeks.
Wow, you got a different edition than I have.
3 weeks before Ashley came to visit again, She soon rediscovered new doors. As her little hand touched the brass knob, she heard her father say, Ashley, I'm giving you a warning. Do not play with Grandpa's office doors. Because of the time that had passed since her previous warning, and given her age, her father correctly gave her a level 1 warning. He admonished her to do right, even though he had instructed her 3 weeks ago earlier. All right, she complied with the warning and went to her toy box for amusement. In this case, the warning did not undermine the character of first-time obedience any more than when God told Cain that his first sacrifice was unacceptable. After that, he must offer a second one. You are not waiving the requirement of obedience, but judging potential disobedience in the light of context, the child's age, and characterization of behavior. Okay, I want to point something out. This is so balanced and level-headed. So if you ever read criticisms of Growing Kids God's Way where they say that it's a tyrannical training method, they haven't read the whole thing. They haven't read this right here. This is saying, look, you have to think about it every time. You have to measure it every time. And consider context, characterization, age. These are, wow, you know, this is really, really balanced. So the third level of offense refers to routine acts of defiance that are both active and passive and so forth. Okay, third level offense involves different types of applied consequence which brings into his life some form of attention-getting discomfort. Right? Pain can come by way of natural and logical consequences, loss of privilege, restitution, and when appropriate, chastisement. Discipline methods are the focal point of our next chapter. Okay. That's some good stuff right there that talks about being ahead of your child, predicting, and then sometimes using correction when the behavior is wrong. But can you see how often that prayer is involved? Hi.
Where's Taylor? I thought Taylor was in here.
She's downstairs.
She's downstairs in the. Okay.
Yeah.
You need pants changed.
Okay.
You want to do it, or you want Mom to do it?
I will head down there here in a second.
Yay, Dad.
Hard to say no when you're in a parenting class.
Ah.
I'll get
Poor
Mom.
guy.
I'm just not making the decision.
Alrighty. So that was it. Basically, we're at the end of the chapter. We just have this consequence. No, we're at the end of the chapter. That graph was on the next chapter. Okay, we're good. And we're 6 minutes from the end of class. So, input?
Present a question.
Yes.
We've got some time.
Yes.
Something that maybe it's too specific, but that they went over in the video. When were they talking about it? It was in overcorrection, under punishment and over punishment. They were talking about, and they gave this example. And I don't want to get stuck on their example, but they were talking about, you know, if your kid goes over and hits a kid in the head with a brick, and then they were like, but that would be bad, and then they were done with that. And I was thinking about it, I'm like, man, that's you know, that would be rough. Where do you even start with that? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, again, you'd have to consider the kid's age. You know, if he's 18 months old, you know.
And that's the reason that it almost has that little bit of a gray area, because like Jordan Peterson talks about rough and tumble play, where they're hurting somebody because they're trying to find where the boundary is. Like they gotta cross the line.
At the same time, the way they find the boundary is when they cross it and you say, no, you don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay? So it's like when your kid bites another kid. You snatch them up, you say, No, you do not do that. You do not bite other kids, and you spank his little bottom until his heart until the sound of his cry is repentant.
And so that's kind of what my question was, is like the severity, because they also were kind of outlining the, whether it applies to a moral / just an ignorance, the reason why they did it.
Okay.
And so even if it's ignorance why they may have done it, it's severe enough that it requires a moral correction.
Yes. Like, your child might bite another kid just because it feels so good to sink his teeth into that squishy flesh. But it's something that is like, no, you do not do that. You do not ever do that. That is something you make an impression upon. That is not okay. Because why? It should never happen again, period. And same thing, little kid's got a truck in his hand, he walks over, wham, he hits the other kid in the head with it. And it's like, well, did he know any better? Was that in innocence? It's like, he will next time. He'll know that he should not, no, that's not okay. So, especially when they're that age, there are times when kids will have to have chastisement or a spanking when they're little. The parameters are different than when they're older and can understand things. Now, what about the kid toddling around the nursery? He sees another kid and they got a truck he wants, so he goes over and he grabs it and he pulls it away from them, and now that's different. It's still wrong, but you're not going to snatch him up and spank his bottom for that. For that, you may just pick him up and say, hey, now, that's not the way we behave. You can't take other kids' toys. We're going to give it back to him. And, okay, find another toy that you can play with. So, in the kid's developmental stage, whacking the kid with a truck or taking the one he wanted may be the same in his little world. He didn't hit the kid in the head with any real maliciousness, like, this truck would probably hurt him, I'm going to go whack him in the head with it. But at the same time, it crossed a boundary that cannot be crossed. And so by establishing that, you are establishing that rough and tumble play boundary. It's like, you can play rough, but you can't intentionally hurt someone. So, in fact, Jordan Peterson has a teaching on this where he talks about rough and tumble play. And he said the reason it's so valuable is because the kid learns that it's okay to play rough, but he can't intentionally hurt dad. If he pulls your beard or he hits you in the nuts, then it's like, hey, if you're gonna act that way, we're not playing anymore. That's the boundary.
And then he gets to learn it there rather than with a brick on another kid's head, I guess.
Yes.
Well, it's like with Colton, he's just a baby, but so Rowan will get down to talk to him, and Colton will grab him, and squeeze him and pinch him, and Rowan will be like, oh, and I'll be like, so then I'll tell Colton, like, even though he's just a baby, I tell him, no, we need to be gentle, and I grab his hand and I say,
right.
Gentle, because it's just a sensory thing for the baby, like, he doesn't realize it.
Right.
But I'm just practicing with him, be gentle.
And
tell Rowan, because he's like, oh, it makes me mad. I'm like,
yeah, be patient.
But you don't. Rowan never retaliates, so that's really great.
Right.
I try to explain to him, well, he's just a baby. He does the same thing to me and to dad.
And the same thing is true, like with that other kid that my older kid has, Georgia. When I was going to have her pet the puppies. She did that 2-year-old thing. They just, he's so cute, I want to squeeze his little head off. So we have to be like, okay, be gentle. Take her hand from her, and then offer the puppy again. Now she's doing right, but now she's got it by the ears. No, be gentle. That's training.
Yep.
That's training. And so her lack of gentleness is mostly childishness. There's a little foolishness in there though, because she just kind of wants to, right? And so then we keep correcting her, but and that's training. But at some point when we realize that she knows better and she still does it, now we might say, I said be gentle with the puppy, right? Now we've established
That's the escalation.
that second, but number 2 level, right? Yeah.
Like, that's level 2. Don't go to level 3.
Don't make me turn on the red flashing light.
But that was an interesting example of with the brick, because you immediately go to level 3 in a situation like that, because
Yes.
it's causing harm to another human being or to a creature, and that's when that boundary, you have to slam the door shut on that one real quick, because there should be no question about that. It's a
Yep.
tough one. Yep.
Remember, control when they're little. Hands on, moving them where they need to be, moving things out of their way, and when you tell them not to do something, they do it. You can, this kind of thing, where you make an impression on them. That's all. That's about training. And then as they get older, things become more thoughtful, as we've been looking at tonight. Okay, why did they do it? What is the appropriate response? It can't be ignored, but we don't want to overreact. And that's why I said, can you see how there's a lot of prayer involved? Because it's like, Lord, give me wisdom, guide me, so that I'll be able to properly admonish my children.
And have the energy to continually move the glass. Over and over again, every day, all the little things.
That's why you have children when you're young. So you have the energy for it.
No doubt about it.
It's kind of ironic. You have children when you're young, so you have the energy for it, but you don't have the wisdom for it. But then you get older, and, then you have grandkids, so you get another shot at it. But I'll tell you one thing for sure. I don't want to raise my grandchildren. I'll help their parents, but I want to raise my children in such a way that I don't have to raise their children.